If you are between 24 and 45 years old, you urgently need to learn what I'm going to teach you in this video. It will make all the difference in your future years, helping you become a highly valuable and successful man with women and professionally. Understand it this way. Some men don't age. They refine themselves. They enter a room and something changes. The silence weighs heavily, glances turn, the atmosphere adjusts. They don't need to talk much. They don't need to smile. They don't need to prove themselves. They are simply there. And that's enough to activate an ancient kind of respect and fascination. Now think of the opposite. The man who enters a place and people look away. The smile that seems forced. The presence that, instead of instigating, unsettles. The kind of presence that feels wrong, inappropriate, even embarrassing. The great tragedy is not being ignored. It's causing repulsion without understanding why. And this is happening now to thousands of men who have reached physical maturity, but have forgotten to mature socially. They have aged, but they haven't evolved. Just 3% of men ever unlock this, and once they do, their entire reality shifts. The Forbidden Manual reveals how to trigger desire in just 60 seconds. And when you get it, you'll instantly receive 3 secret ebooks, free. Tools to sharpen your mind, your control, and your power. Tap the link in the pinned comment. We live in a strange era. Never has there been so much talk about maturity, respect for experience, the wisdom of years. But at the same time, never has there been such a great abyss between the image a man has of himself and the perception the world has of him. There's an invisible line between the magnetic mature man and the creepy old man. And most men don't realize when they've crossed it. And we're not talking about appearance. We're talking about aura. What you transmit without speaking. What the environment feels without you trying to convince anyone. Science has already confirmed what great seducers have always known. Attraction is 90% perception and 10% reality. You don't need to be handsome. You need to be perceived as dominant, as intriguing, as valuable. And this perception is built with details that almost no one teaches. The way you stop, how you hold your gaze, the pace at which you walk, the silence you impose. This isn't learned from ready-made phrases or motivational videos. It comes from reprogramming, a deconstruction of the image of the man needy for validation, and the construction of a new archetype. The man who knows he doesn't need to be accepted, because he himself defines what deserves acceptance. Nietzsche said that what defines good is everything that increases the will to power, and evil, everything that is born from weakness. When a man grows old, but becomes more socially fragile, more emotionally needy, and more insecure in his own decisions, he doesn't arouse desire. He arouses pity, and pity is the silent killer of respect. What differentiates the seducer from the needy man is that the seducer doesn't need to beg for attention. He already has what he wants even before asking. But there's a cruel illusion along the way, that with time, maturity alone would bring respect and magnetism. This is where the fatal mistake lies. Age is not a free pass. It only accentuates what you already were. The insecure man becomes even more visibly uncomfortable. The arrogant man becomes a caricature. And the magnetic man? He transforms into an almost mythical entity, a master of presence, a man who carries a rare kind of tension in his gaze, a magnetism that silences even the youngest. The image is common, almost cliché, a well-dressed man in his 50s trying to talk to a younger woman in a bar or cafe. He smiles too much, speaks too loudly, tries to be funny, tries to seem connected, and all he manages to do is make the surrounding environment shrink with discomfort. Women look away. Younger men roll their eyes. And he doesn't understand. I'm just being friendly, he thinks. But what he doesn't realize is that his presence is charged with an energy that, instead of attracting, repels. It's not his age. It's what he transmits through it. The invisible mistake begins with a subtle lie, that aging in itself brings respect, wisdom, and charm. Society feeds this idea as an anesthetic for the male ego. But the brutal truth is that age doesn't forgive those who don't evolve. And what transforms a mature man into someone magnetic isn't the number of years, it's the depth with which he rebuilds himself throughout them. What we see most of the time is the opposite. Men who have only accumulated time, but not awareness. They repeat old jokes, outdated behaviors, social formulas that worked in another era. And they expect the same result. This mismatch is perceived by women almost instinctively. Female perception is trained from an early age to detect coherence between what a man says and what he is. And when she senses a 50-year-old man trying to act like a 30-year-old, trying to seem cool, modern, or ageless, her brain sounds a silent alarm. This man is not comfortable with himself. And a man who is not comfortable with who he is does not transmit security. He transmits neediness. And neediness, when it ages, doesn't become charming, it becomes pathetic. A young man can even afford to be a little lost, inexperienced, or silly. Youth allows for that. There's time to grow. But the mature man who hasn't transformed into something more refined, more solid, more authentic, begins to resemble a ghost of what he should be. And nobody is attracted to a ghost. He may wear a good suit, have a well-groomed haircut, drive an expensive car. None of that solves the problem. Because it's not about the shell, it's about the energy that escapes through the cracks. And this energy is read, even unconsciously, by those around him. The philosopher Simone de Beauvoir said that old age is only feared by those who don't know what to do with it. And in the realm of seduction, this phrase becomes even more cruel. Because the man who ages without clarity of purpose, without symbolic reinvention, becomes a social wanderer, trapped between what he no longer is and what he has not yet become. But the problem goes beyond aesthetics or insecurity. It lies in the lack of social awareness. Many older men continue to interact as if the world still functioned with the same codes as 20 years ago. They believe that status, financial success, or a good line are enough to impress. They don't realize that the world has changed, that the modern woman perceives value on other levels, that presence, emotional intelligence, active listening, and inner security carry more weight than ostentation or self-centered speeches. That's why so many end up sounding strange. Not because they are bad or malicious, but because they haven't realized that the language has changed, and they continue trying to speak Latin in a world that now listens on digital frequencies. This dissonance creates a feeling of social strangeness that over time comes to be read as creepy. It's like a system that hasn't been updated. The hardware has aged, the software has crashed, but the user insists that everything still works perfectly. And while he says this with pride, the system around him is laughing, or worse, ignoring him. A Princeton University study showed that it takes us only 0.1 seconds to form an impression of someone based solely on facial expression. Now imagine the impact that body language, tone of voice, and micro-expressions have over the course of an entire conversation. When a mature man enters a room trying to be accepted, trying to be liked, trying to prove that he still has something to offer, he is already lost. Because the powerful man doesn't try, he emanates. He doesn't seek, he selects. That's the difference between presence and performance. The man who overperforms, whether trying to appear younger, cooler, or more fun, is always emitting signals of insecurity. And the human brain reads insecurity as a threat, as imbalance. Hence that strange feeling of something doesn't add up when certain older men try to interact. It's not their age, it's the excessive effort. And effort, when perceived, ceases to be seductive. It becomes desperation. Therefore, the first step to transforming your presence is understanding that the problem isn't the time that has passed, but the image you carry of it. You've aged. That's inevitable. But have you evolved, or are you stuck in old versions of yourself? And more importantly, do you still believe that being desired comes from looking young? Or are you ready to discover that true desire is born from emotional mastery and a lack of validation? Cleopatra seduced empires with her strategic intelligence. Julius Caesar wasn't a handsome man. Mark Antony wasn't exactly a symbol of youth either. But both were devoured by her. Why? Because Cleopatra understood the game of perception. She knew that seduction doesn't come from the obvious. It comes from what instigates, what provokes, what challenges. And the mature man, when he awakens, has everything to become that, a living provocation. But to do so, he needs to abandon the idea that he needs to look like younger men, and start behaving like the rarest. Maturity is a gift, but only for those who know what to do with it. For others, it becomes a curse, a constant reminder of what they haven't become, what they haven't achieved, what they've lost. The man who ages without purpose comes to occupy an invisible place in social space. He is tolerated, but never desired. He is heard, but never listened to. And the worst part, he feels it. He knows, even if he can't explain it. This feeling of not belonging, of no longer being relevant, is what leads so many men to become needy, reactive, or even aggressive in their interactions. They are not ill-intentioned. They are desperate for reconnection. But reconnection isn't asked for, it's imposed. And it's only imposed when you rebuild your inner value and let it overflow without asking permission. A man who rebuilds himself in maturity doesn't try to be interesting. He becomes enigmatic. He doesn't try to be handsome. He becomes impactful. He doesn't enter a place trying to start a conversation. He enters in silence, and the environment starts a conversation with him. You don't need to be accepted when it's inevitable. That's the essence of the turnaround. And it begins the moment the mature man stops trying to be liked and starts transmitting something rarer: silent dominance. The great difference between the man who is seen as pathetic and the one perceived as powerful is not in appearance, but in the energy he radiates. And this energy is defined by a single factor: does he need something, or is he already the prize? This is where the first key to the turnaround is born: the substitution of need for scarcity. The average man, as he ages, moves with the anxiety of being noticed. He fills silences with jokes, displays old achievements like dusty trophies, and tries to prove himself all the time. The dominant man, on the contrary, acts as if time is on his side. He doesn't run. He slows down. He doesn't try to occupy space. He becomes the center of the space. This subtle but brutal difference transforms how people feel his presence. There's a turning point every man needs to find: the moment he stops chasing external validation and begins building such solid internal authority that validation becomes a consequence, not an objective. And to do that, he needs to understand a rule that great strategists have always known: those who talk too much beg for attention. Those who talk too little demand respect. Think of Gianni Agnelli, the Italian magnate who led Fiat and became a global icon of elegance. He wasn't just a rich man. He was a man who commanded presence even when he didn't open his mouth. His silence was more eloquent than speeches, and his charm came precisely from what he didn't immediately offer. He represented a type of mature power, the power that doesn't need to be displayed, because its very existence is an affirmation. And here comes the second key to the turning point: ritualistic presence. Everything in a man who has mastered his maturity becomes deliberate. The rhythm of his speech, the unwavering gaze, the deep breathing, the choice of words. He doesn't act impulsively, he orchestrates. Every gesture is laden with intention, and this silent intention is perceived, even unconsciously, by everyone around. Psychology calls this high-authority communication. It's the ability to say little, but carry density in every sentence. The needy man wants to be understood, the dominant man wants to be interpreted. This difference is lethal, because while the first pours out words to fill the fear of not being seen, the second uses silence as a mirror. He makes the other project. He activates the imagination, and whoever masters the imagination masters desire. Don Draper, a character immortalized in Mad Men, is an emblematic example. He wasn't just an advertising executive. He was a living archetype of the man who carries mystery, who conveys value without explaining anything. His power wasn't in what he said, but in what he let slip. And this leads us to the third key: strategic unpredictability. Every man who becomes predictable loses tension. And without tension, there is no magnetism. The human mind desires what challenges, what escapes, what doesn't give itself away on a silver platter. The mature man needs to learn to be a walking mystery. Not pretending to be something he's not, but becoming someone who doesn't need to explain himself. He shares stories with loose ends. He doesn't reveal his intentions directly. He is polite but not submissive, present but not available, cordial but not accessible. This construction of unpredictability creates what psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect. The brain hates incomplete stories. When you say less than you could, when you withdraw at the height of the conversation, when you deliver a look that seems to contain secrets, you activate this effect. And people start thinking about you even when you're no longer present. That's dominance. But all this only works when it comes from a real place. And here lies the trap. Many try to feign authority. They try to imitate the signs of power. They speak more softly, stare intently, avoid smiling, but they do this with the wrong energy, the energy of performance. And performance, however well executed, doesn't stand the test of time. Because energy doesn't lie. You can copy the gestures, but if you haven't done the inner work, if you haven't dissolved your neediness, rebuilt your self-esteem, and cultivated a solid vision of who you are, everything will be read as false, as acting, and the effect will be the opposite: distrust. True mastery is born from within. It is the consequence of a radical decision to stop being emotionally accessible to everything that doesn't add value. The mature man who becomes powerful is the one who accepts losing the love of the weak to gain the respect of the strong. He chooses quality over quantity. He prefers to be respected by a few than validated by all. And this decision, when carried through to the end, transforms his energy. He stops running and begins to gravitate. But be warned, this doesn't mean being cold. It means being selective. It's not about pushing people away. It's about becoming someone so centered, so emotionally untouchable, that being by your side becomes a privilege. You are no longer the man who wants to be accepted. You become the man everyone wants to decipher. And that difference in itself changes the game. A study published in the Harvard Business Review showed that quiet leaders who speak less and listen more are consistently perceived as more competent and trustworthy than those who talk too much. The power lies in the pause, in the silence, in active listening, and in emotional control in the face of chaos. A mature man who reacts little and observes a lot becomes a social magnet, because he is seen as someone who has already seen what matters, and therefore is not shaken by what doesn't matter. Your voice also changes. Men who master their presence don't speak quickly. They don't stutter. They don't justify themselves. They speak as if time were an abundant resource, as if each word had weight. They don't speak to fill the silence. They speak to cut through the noise. And this change of pace alters everything, because whoever controls the timing of the conversation controls the tone of the relationship. Notice the great seducers, the high-performing social performers, the diplomats, CEOs, and war strategists. They all have one trait in common: a kind of solid, almost impenetrable calm. They don't accelerate. They make the world slow down around them. And when you master this state, when you stop reacting and start commanding, the world begins to treat you differently. You enter a room and don't need to raise your voice. Your presence has already spoken. But for this to happen, you need to abandon the role of the man who wants to please. This character needs to die, because all it emanates is neediness. And neediness stinks. Literally. Studies show that anxious or emotionally needy people release biochemical signals that the other person's body interprets as instability. And instability, in the biology of desire, is synonymous with threat. Now contrast this with the man who has learned to say no without anger, who declines invitations with elegance, who withdraws at the peak, the kind of man who doesn't respond to messages immediately, the kind who doesn't reveal everything he has, because he knows he has much more to offer than can be seen in a single interaction. That man is dangerous, because he doesn't need to, and everything he doesn't need is fascinating. When you stop seeking acceptance, you'll start to notice something strange. People will try harder to please you. They'll seek your attention. They'll adjust to your timing, because deep down, human beings are attracted to hierarchy, and you only become the top of the hierarchy when you act as if you're already there. There's a silent belief that corrodes many men, that they need to be liked to succeed. This need for approval, for acceptance, for being a good catch, transforms a man into an emotional beggar. He bows down even before being challenged. He apologizes for his presence, and worst of all, he becomes predictable. But every man who understands the real game of seduction soon discovers an uncomfortable truth. Desire doesn't stem from approval, but from tension. And tension only exists when there's a hierarchy. Herein lies the critical point. Seduction has never been about affection. It has always been about fascination. And fascination is built by those who master the symbols of power, not by those who seek emotional validation. The mistake many men make as they age is believing they need to be more sensitive, more affectionate, more understanding. Not that this is wrong, But when it comes as a bargaining chip to receive love, it completely loses its effect. Because women don't want men who beg for connection. They want men who can't be easily accessed. Robert Greene, in Dissecting the Nature of Seduction, states that the greatest seducers are not the gentlest. They are the most enigmatic. They are not the most empathetic. They are the most unpredictable. Seduction is not a gift. It is a symbolic battlefield, and victory belongs only to those who understand that every gesture, every absence, every silence is a move. The man who understands this stops playing to be loved and begins to play to be inevitable. Nietzsche said that what is done out of love is beyond good and evil. But he also warned, love is the perfect disguise for domination. True seduction doesn't happen when the other person loves you, but when they find themselves subjected to an emotional state they cannot control. And this is only possible when a man embodies an archetype. Because archetypes don't ask for love. They provoke surrender. The archetype of the mature and lethal man is not that of the understanding father, nor that of the nice, friendly guy. He is the hidden king. The emotional priest. The man who knows his worth lies not in how much he gives, but in how much he withholds. He is the one who disappears at the right moment. The one who withholds the kiss. The one who refuses the compliment. The one who doesn't rush to console, but observes in silence, letting the other beg for connection. Because he has understood a law: the more you offer, the less value you have. This truth is unsettling because it goes against everything modern man has learned. We were taught to be good, cordial, agreeable. But this made us domesticable. And nothing is less seductive than a domesticated man. The mature man who refuses to be trained to please becomes a problem for the system, but an obsession for desire. This construction demands coldness, not in an emotional sense, but a symbolic one. You need to understand that seduction, to function at its highest level, requires scarcity. And scarcity requires renunciation. You will have to stop responding to messages quickly. You will have to refuse easy encounters. You will have to accept that you will be misinterpreted, that you will seem arrogant, that you will be called cold, and still maintain your posture. Because every construction of power requires initial rejection. Only then comes respect. And only after respect, desire. The construction of the lethal archetype also involves aesthetics. We are not talking about beauty, but about visual signature. The man who wants to be desired needs to appear the opposite of the man who wants to be accepted. His clothes should not ask for attention, they should impose presence. His colors should not clamor for approval, they should carry authority. His face should not smile too much, it should carry the ambiguity of someone who has stories that no one knows. The archetype is built in detail, and details create mythology. The man who reaches this level no longer enters environments to seduce, he enters to disturb, because his presence disrupts the balance. He represents what few have the courage to be, someone who doesn't need to fit in. And that provokes desire and hatred. But what he reaps is not approval. It's dominance. And when you dominate the other's desire, it no longer matters whether they love you or hate you. They are already trapped, and the game has been won. Now stop for a second and reflect. How have you been perceived? As a man who needs attention? Or as a man who alters the atmosphere? As someone predictable? Or as someone who carries secrets? As a survivor of time? Or as a symbol of power that time has strengthened? You are one decision away from a turning point. But this decision requires sacrifice. You will have to kill the old self. You will have to give up the need to be liked. You will have to abandon the attempt to be understood. You will have to endure silence, rejection, and strategic solitude. Because only after going through this process is the man who doesn't beg born, is the man who dominates born. If you've made it this far, it's because something within you recognized this truth. Now it's your turn to apply it. To become selective, to rebuild your presence, to transform what was discomfort into mastery, what was effort into elegance, what was anxiety into power. Enjoy the video. Share this with a friend who needs to stop looking like a nice uncle and start looking like a man who's impossible to ignore. And comment below, it's time to kill the needy man if you're ready for this change.